story. The proposed Australian lootbox legislation. So a new bill has been introduced in the Australian Parliament proposing legislation to ban video game companies from targeting minors with loot boxes. So this was first reported by the Daily Telegraph after our show finished recording. So it's called the Classification Amendment Lootbox Bill. And it is expected to be in the House of Reps in mid-August. So this is proposed by the independent Tassie MP Andrew Wilkie. He has had a history of being very anti-gambling, especially anti-pokies, which I'm pretty supportive of. The proposed legislation would limit the sale of games containing loot boxes to people above the age of 18 and add an advisory rating to the classification, clarifying that they contain loot boxes. In terms of Wilkie, he argues that the loot box mechanics would groom children for future gambling. Quote, not clear if that's what gaming companies design, but it's self-evident that they have had that effect. We are a country that accepts that people over the age of 18 can gamble, but let's make that for adults and giving parents a warning, and then to allow very young children to pay cash for randomized events that may or may not reward them would meet the definition of gambling. So, I mean, in a way, I think this is probably simpler. I think we all agree with this. Do we not?
Yeah, I totally agree with this. Hell, I would take 100%. It one step further and go, screw you, completely de-legalize loot boxes, period. You know, just because you're 18, okay, wow. So suddenly you turn 18 and all of a sudden your capacity to have free will and make good life choices and not be addicted to gambling is different. No, it isn't. I get that you don't want to groom kids. Absolutely. So this is the first step in doing this. But I think this needs to go one step further. I am like super against the pokies. I hate them with a passion.
You left-wing pinkos.
No, absolutely. I stopped. I mean, I don't know if Coles is any better, but I stopped shopping at Woolies purely because, God, he's back with his bloody amiibos. I stopped shopping at Woolies purely because they owned all the poke chains. Well, not all the poke chains, you know what I mean? They own a whole bunch of poke chains.
It's a big part of the business.
And as a result of that, I'm like, screw you, Woolies. I'm not partaking in that. Now, I did, small thing. Most people don't give a shit about that. Fair enough, whatever. But I know heaps of other people, and I know people that were affected by this directly. So this, to me, yes, we're all in agreement, absolutely. And I think it's an awesome first step in ensuring that...
Well, hang on. We agree with the loot box bill. Like, we don't agree with everything that you just said.
We agree with the loot box bill specifically. The fact that making sure that children aren't targeted by this and making sure that children don't fall into the trap of thinking that this is an acceptable behavior and getting into that behavior to then have the issues later in life. And, we're not talking about... Pokies is not... I'm not necessarily completely against gambling. I'm not against someone going to a casino, playing some blackjack or playing some poker. I think poker is an interesting game. Fair enough. I think people can fall into really big traps with that as well. But I am purely talking about pokies. They're completely 100% random. You sit in front of a screen and you just keep pressing a fucking button until something happens. That is what I'm talking about. Turning people into zombies like that is completely fucking unacceptable. And I think I am surprised that there aren't laws in place yet, that it took this long for something like this to actually happen, and that action is so slow for something that has such a fundamentally massive impact on people's lives when they grow up. It's huge. It destroys families. It literally kills people. And we're fine with this kind of stuff. And it's unacceptable.
Unfortunately, this bill is not to limit pokies. It's to limit loot boxes. But I 100% agree with everything.
Yes, let's go back to that.
So when I saw the headline, I didn't know what this was, who was proposing what, and when I read it was Andrew Wilkie, I thank fuck, because he has a history of being able to actually make stuff happen. He's been able to be the balance of power and get, I don't know where everything's sitting at the moment, but in the past with Julie Gillard and everything, they had to actually kind of work with him on a lot of stuff that he was wanting because of the balance of power and everything. And that's why I'm really, really positive that this may actually, because we've got to remember, this is a bill being introduced. It doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. It's going to obviously take a lot of work to get it to happen. But I can't see a lot of people with the Australian government being such a nanny state in a lot of ways. This almost seems like something that would actually get support from both sides. But the only thing is, obviously, there's a lot of games out there, specifically your FIFAs and everything, that would be the biggest impacted by this, that would obviously have massive, well, what's the term? People influencing certain decision makers and stuff. I can't remember the political term for it, but off the top of my head,
lobbying.
Yeah,
lobbying. That's right.
lobbyists,
Yeah, so it would have a lot of lobbyists kind of pushing for that stuff. But I'm so happy that this. To me, it's strange that it's taken this long to get to this point. So.
Yeah, and I mean the lobbyists definitely have influence, but it's at least not as bad as the US or the UK or EU. I've got friends who are lobbyists actually, and it's like they hate that they can't do what they do in the States. Like in the States, there's a track of like you're an MP, like for our equivalent, like you're a politician, and then you're going to get a job with the lobbyist after. So you got to actually help them out, right? Or else you're not going to get that job in the future. So you're already like bought into their viewpoint. Whereas in Australia, that doesn't happen. So
democracy.
Well, they're trying to do that. Like more and more, you can actually see former politicians are becoming like, I won't mention who, but they're becoming senior members of effectively lobbyists now. So then it's already trying to create that dynamic in Australia, which I think is very toxic to our democracy. I'm fully supportive of this. It's kind of I do feel a bit like weird about it because Australia is horrible with rating games. Like it's been one of the most immature jurisdictions, not having an 18 rating for such a long period of time, banning games. Like I think we have the most banned games out of any country outside of like really nutty countries that I think we ban more games than Germany. They're mostly specifically around like Nazi stuff or, certain type of blood and stuff like that in some of their games. But yeah, like I'm not a big fan of leaning into that, but for this, like I'm pretty supportive. Like,
yeah. Well, I think it is a different element. Sorry, Swinny. Banning games that you have no direct correlation or proof between a particular game causing a very negative side effect. So say, for example, you ban a violent game. There's been many studies done. There is no real correlation between violent games and people acting out violence in real life or becoming more violent, etc. So exactly why you're banning that particular thing is the question, especially to people that are 18 plus. Whereas when it comes to gambling, there are very, very much many pieces of research, don't ask me to quote them, but I know they exist, that do show the link. And they do show the link of getting kids involved with this kind of stuff at an early age and the impact it has later in life. So to me, this is a completely different thing. To me, this is a clear cut, yes, ban this thing, make sure that kids don't have access to this kind of stuff. It's a totally different thing than, an 18-year-old shouldn't be able to play Sextris or something. Well, dude, come on, seriously? Like,
yeah,
at that age, they can make their own decisions like that, and it doesn't have a negative impact.
If this goes ahead, I'm really interested to see what this means for the mobile market, because that is where it is the most embedded. It's one thing to say FIFA or whatever. Like we've kind of had examples of that stuff being done in Europe already, where they just kind of remove mechanics, whereas you can't remove loot boxes from. Like, what about gacha games and stuff? Like that's
it's a core mechanic.
Yeah. So does that just mean they're just not sold on Australian stores? So,
that is
downloadable by Australians.
That is going to expose the flaw that we have in our system, which is if you make a PS5 game and you want to sell it in retail, like in EB Games for us in Australia, it has to go through the classification board to get approval. Whereas if you sell it on Steam, you self-rate it. So you go, Disco Elysium, it's like an MA rating. And they have it on the store and they still sell it, even though it's actually been banned in Australia. It never got removed, like from Steam. So I think the mobile market will stay exactly the way it is, even though it'd be actually contravening the law in Australia. And maybe you'll get the big publishers like the Activisions, EAs, will pull the games out of Australia just because they're, legally more careful. But I think the bigger players won't even give a shit. So it's kind of like, I do wonder if it's going to have the effect that they wanted to have. But honestly, like I'd love to see something change. Like, FIFA and games like that, I wouldn't mind playing them, but they're so geared to the Ultimate Team that I don't even touch them.
Just quickly, we're not going to mention it outside of this, but just the recent news overnight that apparently that crypto thing of all the PS4s that they found. Yeah. And apparently, there's been a lot of misinformation and misreporting around this. Apparently, it was actually being used to farm FIFA Ultimate Team accounts. That's why there's so many game discs in the photos. Because why would you need game discs if you're using it for something like that? But
I read that article. It was hilarious,
oh my god,
so,
that's
it
amazing.
wasn't any because the people did stipulate that PS4 is really useful for crypto mining. Really, that's got to be better ways of doing it.
Whereas you could see have something automatically running just to earn the free stuff and then sell as accounts.
Wow.
Oh anyway, that's a separate thing, but that's just FIFA Ultimate Team is that's something.
It's $1 billion a year revenue maker. It's kind of crazy, but all right, let's get into our new favorite segment of